The Bourrasque is a demon in World of Tanks, and today's video is going to showcase how you can take these things out of the battlefield as well as be able to play them if you do own one of these things to the best ability, and how powerful in these really clutch scenarios these tanks can be. Let's get into it, let's showcase everything, and I hope you enjoy. Of course, the first map that we're witnessing is Westfield, and we're going to see how you can develop a different strategy on various different maps in the Burrasque and how it comes out quite well. Now in this replay, obviously picking up some early damage straight away against the Batch at 12T, removing the vision from the enemy team, or at least one half of the vision, and that is exactly what you want to be doing early on in the game. If you can counter the enemy's vision in the light tanks and kind of high view range mediums, then you're going to be able to have fantastic games, because essentially this vehicle is a light tank, or at least somewhat like a light tank. It's like a light medium, and it is perfect in this sort of scenario. Now then, this bush right here that you're witnessing in this game is a perfect position to be able to spot all of the enemy tanks that are in this location. You can see they're getting absolutely farmed by all of his teammates, being in the EOC VIII, the Bourrasque and the M48, and he's just rinsing them of all of their hit points and just being a real nuisance against most of them, so they cannot really do anything and they have to basically YOLO in to be able to get some damage. Now because of the double bush mechanics and because of the actual kind of ability of the player here, he's able to shut them down really quickly. Now you're actually seeing that he does eventually get spotted, and you can see the CS52 list does place a nice round into him, but it was HE and it didn't manage to pen. That's one weakness of the Bourrasque, is that if enemy tanks do decide that they're going to fire some HE rounds, it can be seriously devastating for your vehicle, because essentially the Bourrasque has no armor whatsoever and you're going to get penned 9 times out of 10 by HE if they land a successful hit onto you. So what else does the Bourrasque have? Well, it does also have the fact that it has this 2-shot autoloader with 360 alpha per shell, 720 in total, and that means you can finish off a lot of the enemy tanks that are going to be within the game, and you can come out on top. Now you're seeing this player here having 3 marks, which of course showcases that they are a very skilled player, and the Bourrasque is typically a vehicle that will work even better if you do have some experience on the game. It is a vehicle that is usually much better, much more capable in the hands of someone that does know what they're doing with the spotting mechanics and also the actual damage within the game. So within this replay, what else are we going to see? Well, we're going to see also the carrying capacity, and let's jump forward to another area of interest. Now then, on this game you're seeing a typical Westfield encounter where your team just lose the hill. At least on the northern side of the map, the enemy team have basically gathered the entire team on that area on the opposite side of the valley, and now it's just a case of trying to get in some easy damage against opponents like this STRV, for example, taking them out of the game as quickly as possible, and then being able to deal with whoever you need to in these games. Now you're seeing him pick up some enemies destroyed here, 3 within this game, and as he's moving forward he's going to be able to spot some of the others in the form of the IS-3A, potentially get some shots onto him. Of course, at this point, in these sorts of games where you're trying to clutch out the win, you need to be removing as many hit points out of the game as quickly as possible, especially when you're down by 4,600 hit points. So it's really imperative that you do that, and it's kind of what you're seeing here, as many shots into the opponents as they're advancing, because this is the point in the game whereby they're probably the most vulnerable, crossing and doing everything like that on the enemy team. Now this position right here is perfect for being able to get some spotting damage and to spot opponents that are going to be progressing nicely on the opposite side. Now you're seeing here the enemy STRVS1, who is on full health, quickly gets removed at least some of the hit points. Now he does get spotted here, which is probably the biggest misplay of the game, getting spotted here, because potentially could have got hit multiple times in that time and taken straight out from this game. Luckily that does not happen, and we're going to be able to see the carrying capacity of this vehicle in these games. So yeah, it's very lucky, but ultimately the best players will take advantage of any kind of luck that's thrown their way to be able to come out with the best results possible. You're seeing here some nice rounds. Obviously does actually manage to remain undetected, and having picked up 3,651 damage as well as nearly 2,000 assistance damage, is probably a very happy Bourrasque player at this point. And of course, in these sorts of scenarios where you are pretty flexible on a map like Westfield, where you have all of the area to kind of progress and to be able to play how you want to, then that is really where the Bourrasque is probably one of the better tanks in the game. And why so many of the higher tier players love playing in this thing is because of the fact it is so flexible, and it has that kind of pack-a-punch that you can just rely upon to be able to remove a lot of the hit points off of the vehicles that you may be seeing. So at this point in the game, it's a 2 versus 5 scenario, and with both of him and his teammate, who is also platooned up with him in the EOC even 90, they have to carry against these last remaining tanks. They're down by 3,500 hit points. The Burrasque is on a 2-shot for pretty much every single tank on the enemy team, and the EOC even 90 is in a similar position whereby he can get taken out very easily. You're seeing him here on just 550 hit points total. They do manage to spot the Concept 1B, good use of double bushing here to be able to remain undetected, at least up until that point, and the Concept 1B is now closing in pretty quickly. So what do you do in these sorts of scenarios where you're trying to win, and why does the Bourrasque do it better than many others in the game? Well, it's not just the case of having great armor, great visibility, it's also being able to remain hidden, being very small, being able to kind of move around the map and just surprise opponents. And when you've got 700 alpha or 720 alpha that you can dish out to opponents on the fly, yes, this tank can be pretty reliable for the most part. And so what the two players are doing here is just seizing the opportunities that they can get. They're not going to make any ridiculous OP plays that are going to suddenly change the game, but they're going to rely upon the attributes of both of these vehicles to hopefully come out on top. Now this Concept 1B has progressed, and you're seeing some good use of kind of getting into position, a nice round into the side of the Concept 1B's turret, and you're seeing they're not even spotted for making that play, which is perfect. Good use of the bush mechanics once again. Now, unfortunately, he does take a hit from the STRV-S1 there, which is a real annoyance because that vehicle is definitely one of the most undetectable tanks in the game, and so you have to be very careful when trying to push towards them because of the camo and concealment, and generally the view range of those vehicles is ridiculously good. So with the STRV-S1 now spotted by the EOC even 90 and the enemy base or the friendly base being capped, they've got to make sure that they're making some kind of aggressive plays so that they can take this STRV out, then they can outspot the tanks that are going to be in the cap circle and go on with the game as and when they feel comfortable to be able to do that. So it's now down purely to the Burrasque player here with 3 marks, and he definitely knows his way around the Burrasque. He knows the benefits, he knows the advantages. Obviously he knows that there is 720 hit points on the Burrasque, and it's very crucial that he does dish out that remaining 2 shells in the magazine at the current point onto anyone that is in the cap, because without taking out the cappers we're not going to be able to see any potential wins come out of this, because we all love how to see how capping actually works. So with a couple of quick shots into the side of the STRV and remaining undetected as usual with the Bourrasque, you're able to kind of take out opponents pretty quickly and in a hurry. Now with just this one tank in the enemy base being the STRV 103-0, it's time to try and get some shots into the side armor of this thing. It does manage to hit one, hits the second one, and now with the base completely reset and another 1 minute and 35 seconds on the clock to be able to then deal with whatever he needs to next, it is definitely a very good scenario. Now then, very quickly after that, the E75 does appear out of nowhere for a tank that is absolutely massive to appear out of nowhere anyway, and he does manage to miss the Bourrasque, which is lucky, but it definitely allows our player here to be able to get into a new position and to surprise the opponents once again. So having done 6,000 damage and 1,918 assistance within this replay, you know that this is a ridiculously good game, and it's starting to be apparent because the actual rounds of the vehicle are starting to run low. And with this sort of matchup, the shot into the top or the roof of the E75 shutting him down at the end of the game or nearing the end of the game is perfect, because that allows him now to deal with this STRV who is in the cap circle, or at least has just left the cap circle. Now the STRV is not alone. There is a Skoda T56 that is on the enemy team, and we have no idea where this player is. Obviously he was last spotted in the town area on the other side of the map, but so far not been detected by the Bourrasque here, and so you've got to play very kind of more passively at this point in the game, because the STRV has fantastic view range, as we've already mentioned, that is probably going to be able to actually find the Bourrasque in certain situations, and that is not what you want with this vehicle in these sort of scenarios where you're trying to carry the game. With 6 kills under his belt and 6,500 damage done now, yes, it is almost one of the best games at this point in the World of Tanks, at least currently on the What Replays server so far. Now then, our player here does manage to spot the Skoda T56, and with a nice round into the side of him and realising that the Skoda is indeed AFK, it's perfect. In this sort of scenario, you'd have thought that the Skoda would have made some changes, or at least tried to come back to the game, but obviously maybe he got a little bit too confident that his team were just going to win this game, and unfortunately for the STRV, he's now going to be down a teammate within this game. At least if he did manage to actually roll average, and unfortunately that isn't the case in this replay so far. So with 7,855 damage done and just a few rounds left, just 4 rounds, it is imperative that this last round into the Skoda does indeed connect and pen, and it does, which means that there are now 3 rounds left in the magazine, or at least in the tank, to be able to deal with this STRV, and with 745 hit points, that means that on average he will need every single round left in his vehicle to take out this STRV, and that is not good. That is not good at all, because the Bourrasque, although it does have a very nice gun, can be a little bit inaccurate, and in these clutch scenarios, if you are trying to be super accurate, it can be a pain when you do try and go for it, and unfortunately here we're going to see the kind of Bourrasque move in towards the STRV. The STRV then bounces, which is perfect, and with a nice little round hopefully into the side of the STRV, we're going to see a pretty decent result. Now the STRV does get into a better position, and he bounces off of the Bourrasque, almost unheard of, and with the STRV now kind of struggling with the terrain and with the Bourrasque's long reload, it's not ideal at all. Can he manage to get the last shot into him? Can he do it? Oh, not quite so far, and with 16 hit points on the STRV left, and with just a very slim picket shot, is he going to try and do it? He does indeed connect the shell, and it is a victory for the Bourrasque in this replay, which was outstanding. Let's check out the next one. These videos do take some time, so if you have some time right now, please hit that like button and also subscribe if you want to see more content like this from these videos. Really does help out the channel, and let's get into the next replay for today. On Airfield, and this is a map and a game that I just genuinely didn't expect to actually come out on top, and that's because the result that ends up being the end of the game is utterly unbelievable, and the Bourrasque player here is going to have a worldie. And of course we're going to showcase how you too can replicate these sorts of games, and try and give my opinion on how you can play the Bourrasque, and also how you can counter a player like this playing in the Bourrasque, because I'm sure many of you do not own this, or at least you don't always play in this thing, and sometimes it can be a real pain in the backside to be able to fully get rid of these vehicles from the game. Now, how can you deal with the Bourrasque? So first things first, of course, we have talked about the HE in the first game and how you can pen these things really easily with HE, and of course increase the damage that you're going to be dealing to them, whilst also limiting how much damage you're going to be receiving by trying to dodge some of the shots, and by making sure that you try and only expose yourself very limited to the Bourrasque and the ability to get one shot into you. Of course, if you can only limit the Bourrasque to being able to hit you once every single 2, it makes the 20 and a bit second reload of this vehicle a little bit painful for the Bourrasque player to come out on top with, because ultimately it will take him over 20 seconds to fully deal 720 alpha, making the DPM of this vehicle pretty bad. But you're seeing here that the enemy team are kind of forgetting about the Bourrasque, and this is what usually happens for players like this. Often a lot of the enemy team, they don't realise that the Bourrasque will reload as quickly as it does, and they also don't realise that you can lose 720 hit points so quickly against these things, and that most players just will not be able to kind of react quick enough to the actual aim time, the accuracy, and also the movement speed of the Bourrasque, because most people probably don't have thumbs on World of Tanks, and of course you're probably not one of them if you're watching this video, so hopefully you too can actually hit these Bourrasque. And of course the key thing to actually dealing with these is, like we said, making sure that you do push them when they are on reload. These tanks are severely underpowered when it comes to being pushed on reload, because they do not have armor whatsoever, so any damage that you deal to them, or any hits that you actually manage to successfully land on the Bourrasque, pretty much pen, even with HE, and so yeah, they're basically a big old tank, and if you can bounce a few rounds and you can deal your damage to them, then there's really nothing that a Bourrasque can do back to you if you do push them aggressively. So although it seems counterintuitive to push into a tank that have 720 health that can push at you, once they've dealt that damage, they are pretty much a sitting duck, and it is just the fact that they have the speed to try and get away from you that is really going to be their saving grace within a lot of the games playing in the Bourrasque. So you're seeing here a kind of aggressive playstyle, unfortunately not managing to get any damage onto the tank as he gets removed very quickly. The AE phase 1 on the enemy team, not realising that you can get shot from the side here as usual on airfield, and he does take a nice hit. I always use this position on airfield if I do make the mid-ridge, especially in this later half of the game, or at least the mid-stage, because a lot of vehicles like this 53 TP, like the AE, will push aggressively through this midsection, and you can get some nice free early damage, or at least free damage in the middle of the game onto people like this, and luckily the Vipera comes around and he can land a shell into him as well. So these are the sort of positions, as with the first game, which the Bourrasque loves, and that is remaining undetected, just being a nuisance, spotting for your team, whilst also spotting for yourself, and just being a real little rat that can just dish out quite a bit of damage. You're seeing here a nice shell just waiting for the tracks of the 53 TP to then land another round, and there you go, shutting the 53 TP down and picking the damage total to nearly 4,800. So, as we talked about earlier in the first replay, with the camo of this vehicle, you can tell that this thing is always going to end up very well, because not only is it the speed of a lot of light tanks in the game, it also has that camo factor. Not as good as some of the light tanks in the game, but it definitely is more than enough to be kind of out-spotting a lot of these tank destroyers, a lot of the heavy tanks, a lot of the mediums in the game, and so generally it's usually pretty fun. Now you're seeing the final round into the Bisonte there, lovely round, lovely placement, great accuracy from the Bourrasque there, and of course the player behind the Bourrasque, and yeah, we're picking the damage total up to 5,800 and hopefully securing the victory, at least in some regard, for his team. Now there is a charioteer sat in the base up in the top, and with the blind firing capability of the Bourrasque and the kind of long aim time, he does manage to hit both shells into the charioteer and finishes him off as well. So that's a lovely kind of addition to this tank, but the one thing that you did notice there was that the aim time is not particularly great, so you do spend a long time aiming in between your shells. So if you're after the quick 1-2s, you typically have to be right near the opponent so you can kind of strafe them. You can deal your 2 shots of damage in quick succession as soon as you reload, whereas in the majority of cases you don't want to be just firing as soon as you can, because the accuracy or dispersion of the vehicle is not going to particularly help you out all too much. So in this, what can you do from this point within the game? Well, you can go after the 53 TP, but you have to be very careful that there aren't any sneaky tank destroyers ready to take you out. The 53 TP does come outside on, or at least tries to reverse back, which is expected, but given that he's on full health and the 53 TP is not even turning around to actually deal with him, there's not really any worries there. And from this point you can go after the G-Saw and dealing 6,500 damage so far, and potentially some some blind damage as well. It's looking pretty nice indeed. So 1 round into the G-Saw, waiting for the connection on the second, and of course shuts him down. And the execution style of the Bourrasque is exactly why this tank is horrible for a lot of the tanks. And I'm sure you guys who have played this game for any length of time understand how annoying the Bourrasque is, and many of the times you'll get just taken out by this thing that Shiolos you at the end of the game, realises that you're on 400 hit points of damage, just comes by, drives by you, and then you're out of the game very quickly. But this replay, much like the previous, showcases the pure power and carrying capacity and just sheer damage numbers that the Bourrasque can actually grant you within World of Tanks. So hopefully you did enjoy this video. Don't forget to check out some of the other videos that showcase how you too can perform well in vehicles much like this, and even vehicles that maybe aren't as good.